Your story matters, don't let it fade. When everything changed, you were made.
All right. So when everything changed, I was forced to see my own self portrait in a new light. Back when I was in high school, I had this art teacher, and she was amazing, just a truly wonderful person. And she taught me so many things. But the most important thing she taught me was that everything you make is a self portrait. You put a part of yourself into anything that you create. I didn't know it back then, but those words would save my life. It was only about a year after hearing those words that I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. I was 16. Completely blindsided is how I would describe my reaction to this news. I was under the impression that I was the happiest I'd ever been. I mean, I had my friends, a boyfriend, my family, my art. How could I be depressed? So while the doctor was explaining what medication they were going to put me on and what the side effects were, all I could think was, is this going to be my life now? Is it even possible to get better from something like this? So I blurted out my questions, and the answer was not as cut and dry as I'd hoped. Sometimes people are on the medication forever, and then sometimes people are able to eventually cope without it. But it's impossible to tell which direction my mental illness is going to take. So confused and spiraling, I did the only thing that made sense to me: turn it into art. I had gotten closer to my art teacher by then, and I was already taking a 3D art class. So an idea started to take root, pun intended. I approached my teacher about my ideas, and she gave me the go ahead, along with everything else that I needed to get started. And I do mean everything. She let me work during class time and even introduced me to the wonder that is the art room storage closet, or as I like to call it, Narnia. So there I was, armed with my frustration, a wish for all of it to just go away, and now every art supply known to man. I thought about my teacher's words. Everything you make is a self portrait. You put a part of yourself into anything you create. In the end, I went all in on a tree made of wire. I spent weeks braiding and twisting and balancing my fears, but also my hope. I chose my materials carefully because somehow, even then, I knew that this would be important. And my tree came to life. I called it New Beginnings. Uh, the branches reached upwards, and the the painted pill bottles hung like lanterns, with the roots crisscrossing over the base, with broken pill bottles scattered in between like stepping stones. The idea was that someday I would be this tree, that I would grow into something beautiful, and that first pill would just be a seed planted a long time ago. I had created a self portrait for my future self to look back on and say, we did it. In the years to come, I would face things that I never imagined possible. And my tree would fade to the back of my mind just in time for everything else to come crashing down around me. September 1st, 2014, I was assaulted by a close friend of mine. That was a very hard time for me, as I'm sure you can imagine. But what made it worse was I couldn't make anything. I would sit with my sketchbook in my lap for hours, just willing myself to put the pen to paper. Nothing would come out. My fear of reality had me paralyzed. To actually sketch my feelings would mean I'd have to acknowledge that this was all really happening. Things took a turn for the worse about a month after that when I tried to take my own life. I was so overwhelmed by keeping everything trapped on the inside I just remember my eyes unclouding and I had a handful of pills in my hand with no memory of how I got there. It took hitting rock bottom for everything to come streaming out of me. And I heard my teacher's voice again like a siren's call. Everything you make is a self portrait. You put a part of yourself into anything that you create. The first thing I was able to draw was a scream trapped in a birdcage. I don't have that picture anymore, but it accurately represented how I felt back then. Trapped. I felt trapped in a life that I never wanted. This was not the self portrait I had planned for myself, but it was a self portrait nonetheless. It took some doing, and I had a lot of help, but eventually I was able to pull myself from the edge and started counseling. Oh boy, was that rough. I found out very quickly that I had no idea what I was doing. After my first session, counselor had to print out a list of feeling words because I wouldn't stop describing things in elaborate metaphors. She would say, "How are you feeling today, Jennifer?" And I would say something like, "I feel like I'm in a room with blue walls, with no doors, in a house that's on fire." Yeah, apparently slam poetry isn't the best communication technique. I actually argued with her once about whether or not me having a panic meant that I was scared. I wouldn't let up. I would not bickering with her until she actually looked up the definition of panic. Sudden uncontrollable fear or anxiety, often resulting in wildly unthinking behavior, is the definition applied by Google for anyone wondering. One day, after a particularly rough appointment, I left feeling completely crestfallen and like no one was ever going to understand me. And I had an idea. Everything you make is a self portrait. You put a part of yourself into anything you create. If I couldn't tell my counselor what was going on inside my head, then I was going to show her. I plopped myself down in the middle of my dining room that night and I started working on a very intentional self portrait. The result was the face of a woman with her skin fading in and out to reveal a complicated background of X's layered over each other. The next week, I walked into my counselor's office and I was ready to fight. I showed her my painting and I explained. My mind is constantly busy. There is no rhyme or reason to anything. If you ask me a direct question, I can't find the answer. I don't know how to sort through it all. And I could see in her eyes, she suddenly understood. Victory! And then the real work began. It was like a switch had been flipped. Epiphanies and realizations galore. I would leave her office most days feeling like I'd just run a marathon. My body was sore all over. But tying it all together was art. The first time my counselor came into an appointment with a pack of colored pencils and asked me to draw what nurturing feels like, I felt so seen. It was amazing. So after a few years of some hardcore reprocessing, I was set loose on the world. And by that, I mean my counselor decided that I now had all the tools I needed to be a functioning member of society. I left her office feeling empowered and ready to take on that world. The world is not an easy place to be, though. It's messy and it's angry all the time, and so was I. It doesn't matter, it didn't matter how much work I'd done on myself or how much of my past that I'd reprocessed. The world is never done throwing me curveballs. One such curveball would hit me in my mother's garage of all places. She was packing and getting ready to move, so I come over that day to pick up some of my junk she'd been storing since high school. I rounded a corner and I caught sight of my tree. Yep, that tree. At first, all I could think was, how am I going to fit this in my car? When I was then hit with an intense flashback, I was suddenly 16 again. I was outside of my high school. I was sitting out on the sidewalk with a boy, and he was helping me break for my sculpture, for my portrait. We were laughing and we were talking. It was a great time, and he was a really, really good friend, and his help back then brought us even closer. I used those broken pill bottles as the stepping stones on my tree, not knowing that a few years later, he would be the one to assault me. The moment that changed everything. I was completely overwhelmed by all the feelings inside of me. I couldn't make sense of them all, but horror quickly rose to the top of the list. How had I missed this? It had been years since I made my tree, and I'd never noticed. How had I not noticed his hands on my self portrait? This thing that my younger self had made for me, had put so much effort and time into, and now it's just wasted. Then came realization. Oh God, it's still a self portrait. This tree had told my story before I even knew it was going to be written, before anyone knew. The truth was there all along, scattered among the roots, my roots. I have suffered. I almost had my inner light stolen from me. But regardless of how I felt about it, that boy had left his mark on my life the same way he's now left his mark on my tree. But the tree is still here. And so am I. My story continued, and he just became a stepping stone. When I was building my tree, I chose wire to make it out of because I knew it was sturdy but moldable. I knew that it could withstand the storm and still be whole at the end, even if it needed to be bent back into shape. The painted pill bottles were meant to be all of those leftover bad memories, those bad, terrible things that would just eventually be bad memories. And the wooden cross at the bottom was the solid foundation that is really necessary for anything that you want to be long lasting. All of these things are me. I have weathered the shitstorm. I have allowed myself to be reshaped by my experiences while still holding on to those things that are important to me. All those bad things really are just leftover memories now. I can look at my past now and feel no shame. And at the base of it all, my family supporting me through everything, no matter what curveball the world throws at us. 16-year-old me was right. We really could do this. I had called my tree New Beginnings all those years ago. But now I truly understand. New beginnings do not happen once in a lifetime. Happening every day. We are all constantly growing and changing and doing the best we can with what we have. But we all have a past. Something we wish that wasn't a part of our story, a part of our self-portrait. Obviously I do. I've spent so much of my life running away from my own history that I've missed out on so many possible new beginnings. I forgot what the point of a self-portrait was. Everything you make is a self-portrait. You put a part of yourself into anything you create. The point of a self-portrait is to show people who I am, to share a part of myself with everyone, and sometimes to remind me who I am. I am colorful. I am funny. I am a lover of musical theater. I am also damaged. I'm and I am scared, even if it took a dictionary to prove it to me. All of these things make up my self-portrait, and it is no less beautiful. So now, when I'm struggling and having a really bad day and feeling like there's just no way out, I think about my tree. It is long since been weathered by time. The branches sag and have to be bent back into place. The pill bottles have completely lost their color, but it still stands. So I will too. In the future, if you are ever stuck in that seemingly endless cycle of what if life had been different, I would really appreciate it if you could do me a favor. Picture your younger self, the one who had no idea what was coming, but still somehow survived everything and made you the person you are today. Take their hands and say to them the words that 16-year-old Jennifer always knew we would get to say. We did it.
Your story matters, so let it be told.